What is up? Welcome to the docket presented by Defense Diaries. I am your host, Bob Mata, and I'm saddened and excited about what we're covering tonight. It's just one of those stories that there's too many of them out there. Where justice has gone unserved for decades, and this particular story that we're going to be talking to you guys about tonight happens to involve a very dear, close friend of mine, fellow creator, and I really call him an advocate creator. I don't know if that's a real thing out there, but that's what he is. He started a podcast years ago. Really, the impetus was to get justice for his baby brother. And it's just I'm going to give you a trigger warning now, right at the beginning, because we're going to get into the facts of what happened to Jacob, who is Eric's baby brother, who only got to live 9 months of his life before that was stolen from him. And, what you're going to hear is going to disturb you. So I just want to give everybody fair warning that it's not a comfortable listen. And if stories about harm that has befallen children is very upsetting or triggering to you, then you may want to pass on this one, because we've got to get into it. But I just wanted to let you all know that it was coming, so that you had the opportunity to make your own decision. So I want to throw up the picture of this beautiful little angel who happened to be the little brother of my friend, Eric Carter-Landin, who I'm going to bring on here in a minute, who's sitting backstage patiently waiting. And this sweet little guy is Jacob Landin. And like I said, he only lived 9 months of his life before his life was taken from him. And this was Eric's little brother. And he has spent a majority of his life fighting to get justice for this little guy, in a story where you're going to quickly find out that this isn't a whodunit. This is a story where everybody involved knows who did it and knows what happened. And yet, here we sit in 2024 with no arrest ever having been made, no trial ever being had, and no justice for Jacob. So Eric has been spending a lot of time over the past few years to raise awareness of his brother's case. And I'm, of course, going to join in the fray. Him and I have been talking about doing this for a long time. We have a ton of creators out there that have really stepped up and helped spread the word about this case. It's gotten to the point now where, in my estimation, what needs to happen is pressure. We have to apply pressure to the Attorney General or the DOJ, whatever they want to call it in New Mexico now, because, well, I won't get ahead of myself, but he got recent news from them, which made him extremely upset, and which also infuriated me. Which got me to the point where I'm all right. I don't care who's doing these, like in bulk, like if they're falling on top of each other, it's like, I've got to get it out there. I've got to get my voice heard on this thing. And I want him to be able to get his voice to you guys as well, because he's a wonderful guy. So without further ado, I am going to pull him on. Welcome, my brother.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm, as you know, I'm pretty pissed off right now. but I'm happy to be here with you, and I appreciate you sharing your platform with me tonight.
Of course, it's long overdue, frankly. We've done stuff together, but we haven't done the most important thing, which is this. And now we are. And,
Yeah,
I think now to me, based on the most recent developments, this is the time that we really need to pick up the volume on this thing,
yeah,
and not just you and I, but at large. It's so frustrating, and you're in the world of advocating, particularly for family members,
mhm,
and firsthand just how frustrating it can be and how it often is. And
yeah,
many times, the only thing that ever has some kind of effect is typically pressure by the public at large, just getting in their faces, letting them know, we're not going anywhere, that this isn't okay, that we have a voice and we're demanding that it be heard. Because
mhm,
these people that you're dealing with, and their underlings. The attorney general is an elected official. These people are elected to these positions, and we have expectations as citizens of this country and of your state, New Mexico, that they're going to do the job. And when they don't, we have to call them on it.
yeah.
And this is one of those situations. So why don't you go ahead and just kind of give people an overview of Jacob's story?
Sure. It's not something that I can easily summarize because it is a long story. So I'm going to do my best, and then Bob, you can just reel me back if I'm going too far in the weeds. But
I don't
Jacob
think I'll be
Landin.
doing much reeling. You go, brother.
Thank you.
Go as deep in the weeds as you need to, man.
Thank you. So Jacob Landin, my baby brother, was born on July 1st, 1987. Um, my family was really religious. My dad was an evangelist. He would travel around and have like big tent revivals. So he was that kind of preacher. And I grew up moving around a lot. I'm from New Mexico originally, born in Socorro, small tiny town. We were living in Texas when my mom got pregnant with Jacob, and I had been praying every night for a baby brother. That was part of my nighttime prayers. And one day we were at the park. I had just learned how to ride my bike without my training wheels, but I crashed into a bush and I was crying because I had scraped my knee. And my parents knelt down to check on me and told me in that moment that I was going to be a big brother. And I completely forgot about my injury, and I started running around and screaming and jumping up and down. I was so excited. Um, he was my miracle, you know, and he was incredible. My parents, though, were having problems in their relationship. Because of my dad's job, he would leave for weeks at a time and s- would often forget about my mom and I and my brother. And so there would be weeks where, my mom didn't know how we were going to eat. She had two young kids, she couldn't work. And luckily, we had a neighbor that would sometimes leave food on our doorstep. But she'd had enough, and she realized that my dad was starting to have this emotional connection with another woman, and so she packed us up and she moved us back to New Mexico. Um, it made a lot of sense because she could be closer to my family, my grandmother and my aunts that could help watch the kids so that she could work and start to kind of build her life without my dad. Um, Around the same time, though, my dad's best friend started coming around. And so before we kind of go into that part of it, I just want to make something really clear for everybody. Um, this person who I'm not going to name today, uh, for some reasons, for reasons, that's what I'm going to say. Um, he wasn't a stranger. He was my dad's best friend. He was married to my mom's brother, or he wasn't married to my mom's brother. His sister was married to my mom's brother. His aunt is my godmother. His dad married my parents because he was a minister. And so my mom went to school with this person. They went to church together. They knew each other their whole lives. Our families ran in similar circles. And it's just important to know that this was not a random person. This was a stranger. He started love bombing us. He knew all about what happened with my parents' relationship because he was my dad's best friend. So he knew that my mom was vulnerable. He knew that she had picked up her kids and left from one state and moved back home, and she was living with her parents again. He was aware of all of this, and he started showering us with love and affection and gifts and attention, all the things that we were starved for from my dad. And so if you don't know what love bombing is, I recommend you look into it. It's a disarming technique that's used by people who are predatory, I guess would be the word I would just use. I think that makes more sense. To get their victims lulled into a sense of trust. And it's done quickly. It's done fast. So my mom and I were both disarmed by this technique. Immediately I'm like, I want to spend time with this person. He's amazing. If I wanted candy for dinner, we had candy for dinner. Like that was the kind of stuff that was happening that a reasonable adult probably would not do unless they had some kind of motive behind it. And so he starts telling my mom that, we're in love and I'm in love with you and I want to be with you and I want you to move in with me and I'm going to take care of your kids and I'm going to give you the life that you deserve because you're beautiful, all this stuff. And so they start dating, and then things start happening to Jacob. He starts to have injuries that at the time were unexplainable. Eventually, though, this person starts to blame me for some of the injuries that Jacob's experiencing. He starts to create this story that I am extremely jealous of Jacob to the point that I am constantly hurting him at every turn. And I don't remember being jealous of Jacob, like to the point that I would want to hurt him. I'm not saying that that's not possible because I know that kids do get jealous when they have a baby come into the house. But what I remember is being jealous of his name and thinking that he had a better name than me, until my grandmother told me that my name meant princely. And then I was like, nah, I'm good. Actually, my name's cool. I'm not mad anymore. So, but according to my mom's boyfriend, I am this really angry, jealous 5-year-old that wants to hurt my brother at every turn. And Jacob gets a skull fracture somewhere around maybe like 8 months, 7 months. And my mom's boyfriend told my mom that he had left me and Jacob alone so he could drop his kids off at their mom's house. I'm probably 6 at this point. Jacob is, like I said, 7 months. I don't know any responsible parent that would ever think it would be a good idea to leave a 5-year-old, 6-year-old with an infant for any period of time alone. Like that is not responsible parenting. I don't know that happened. This is what he said happened. I don't remember this happening. He claimed that I took Jacob out of the crib and dropped him on his head. The crib itself was probably like 5 foot tall with the rails up,
Yeah,
maybe
that
5.5 feet tall.
when
I
I
mean,
was
this was the
reading through the
80s.
reports, yeah,
Yeah.
dude, like how is a 6-year-old climbing? Like it's implausible to me. Sorry.
No, absolutely. So then when people start to kind of like, they're not sure about that, he then claims that I kicked Jacob in the head. I don't see that it would be physically possible for me to kick him hard enough, even if I had shoes on at 6 years old, to fracture his skull. Like, I just don't see that. But maybe, I don't know. I don't remember kicking Jacob. So my mom isn't sure what's happening. Like I said, she knew this person for her whole life. And so rather than like, I don't know what the other alternative was, but she decided to send me to my dad's house in California, just to get me out of the situation. And Jacob's injuries continued while I was gone. So a few weeks after I left, my mom had really stopped leaving Jacob alone with her boyfriend because she just wasn't sure what was going on. She probably had some suspicions and some concerns because Jacob's behavior had changed. And when I say that, it's important to know that Jacob was fearless as a baby. And I know that he was young, he was an infant, but he had so much personality for an infant. Like, we remember this stuff. Like, I remember he had a baby swing and he used to reach forward when the swing went forward, grab the front legs of the swing, and then he would try to throw it backwards. And the first time he did it, he actually fell and everybody freaked out. And so we started putting the swing against the wall, but he kept trying to do it over and over again because he thought it was hilarious. He actually laid there laughing, and he laughed like Eddie Murphy. Like, he did this like it's just kind of the weirdest laugh I'd ever heard. But he was always doing crazy things. Like, he was pulling all of the out of the drawers out of the cabinet, and there would be cutlery all over the floor, and he thought it was hilarious. He liked to play Superman. He liked to be picked up over your head and all this stuff. Well, as all these injuries started happening, Jacob started to become more afraid of those types of things. One time my grandma had him and she tried to pick him up over her head, and he started screaming and crying and pulling her hair. And she showed my mom that, and he essentially jumped out of my grandmother's arms and into my mom's arms. So she went to her boyfriend and she was like, I don't know what's going on here, but like, Jacob's acting different. And I don't know if you're playing too rough with him or if you're hurting him or what you're doing, but he's not the same as he used to be. And so her boyfriend grabs Jacob, picks him up, and he's like, all I do is this. And Jacob, again, is screaming and crying and trying to jump out of his hands into my mom's arms. So my mom says, I don't care what you're doing, you need to stop. He doesn't like it. He doesn't want you to play with him like that. Don't do that ever again. And then she started limiting how much time Jacob was alone with this man, to the point where she had it pretty much covered. Like, he didn't really have to watch Jacob. She was just trying to protect her kid in that moment. One night, Jacob was still recovering from his skull fracture. He had to have his skull had to be or his head had to be lanced and drained because of the skull fracture. Like, it had started building up fluid. And so he was wearing like this styrofoam helmet thing, and he hadn't been feeling well. They had given him some medication, but he had been allergic to it. So he'd been fussy for a couple of days. And my grandmother wanted to go to church. This was on April 9th, 1987. And she called my mom at work and said, hey, I really want to go to church, but Jacob is super fussy. Like, is there somewhere I can take him, between now and between the time you get off of work? And my mom was like, well, I guess you can go to my boyfriend's. I have to go meet him. We're going to go look at a place to live in together. I'm getting off in an hour, so I'll just be home soon. As soon as she got off the phone with my grandmother, though, she started to panic a little bit. She started to feel really nervous about the idea of Jacob being alone with him. And so she starts begging her boss to let her leave work early. And he tells her no. She's working in a grocery store. It's like 6:00 in the evening. She gets off at 7. It's about to get busy for dinner. So she just starts busying herself. And in less than an hour, her boyfriend comes running into the grocery store in a panic, saying that Jacob is unconscious and unresponsive. At the same time, there's an ambulance driving by, going to the hospital with Jacob in it. Jacob's injuries are so severe that he has to be life flighted 75 miles away to Albuquerque so that they can treat his injuries. And it was so serious that as soon as he arrived at the University of New Mexico hospital, the surgeon had to sign off on a surgery, on an emergency surgery, because my mom was driving the 75 miles to get there. And my mom gets there, her boyfriend's with her, my grandparents are with her. The whole way he's telling my mom, I didn't do this on purpose. This was an accident. I swear, I promise I didn't do this on purpose. I promise this was an accident. When they get there, Jacob's still in surgery. And Jacob actually passed away while in surgery. The doctor came out to tell my mom and my family that Jacob had died. My mom, according to the file, ran away crying and wailing. Her boyfriend turned to the doctor and said, "This doesn't look good for me. This looks really bad for me. I can't believe this is happening to me." And the doctor thought that it was so weird that he was expressing this behavior that he actually wrote it down in Jacob's file. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, which resulted in a hematoma as well as fluid filling up in Jacob's lungs. And the doctor noted that the size of the injury on the top of his head was about the size of an adult male hand. And it looked as if Jacob had been hit with an open palm. An investigation started. I flew back to New Mexico with my dad and was immediately escorted into an interrogation room and asked if I had hurt Jacob, if I was jealous of Jacob, if I wanted to hurt Jacob. And then I started to get asked things like, "Has your mom's boyfriend ever hit you?" And I said, "No, but he always acts like he's going to." The investigation continued. My mom stopped talking to her boyfriend. He kept telling her that he wanted to tell her what really happened, that he was going to tell her the truth. He suggested that they meet at Jacob's grave. She didn't go. We had the funeral. And I don't know, like a bunch of things happened, I guess. So there's a lot of stuff that I know now that I didn't know back then that we're probably going to need to get into down the road in this conversation. So I'm going to kind of wait on that stuff, like things that happened with the investigation and things like that. But essentially, he tells my mom a couple of things. He says, "I'm going to prove to you, first of all, that I didn't do this on purpose. I have to go take a polygraph in Santa Fe. And so I want you guys to come with me so I can show you that I'm telling you the truth and that this was an accident and I didn't mean for this to happen." And so my mom wanted to know the truth. She had been asking him to tell her the truth. And so we went with him. I think this was in July of the same year where the polygraph happened. We waited for hours and hours and hours for him to come out of there. And then he did. And he was happy and he was like in a good mood. And this is 1987, right? So polygraphs were seen a little bit differently back then than they are now. And we believed that he must have been telling the truth because he walked out of the state police and nobody arrested him. He was free. So clearly, to a kid and my mom, we just like, okay, maybe he's telling the truth. And then he drops another bomb and says, "Oh, and by the way, I put you on my health insurance at work as my wife, even though you're not my wife. And I'm probably going to go to prison for insurance fraud for that. So you're going to have to marry me if you don't want me to go to prison." So they got married. Again, she believed that he had passed the polygraph. She believed that he was innocent. She had known him her whole life. I got to say all that stuff because I know people are going to get really mad when I say that she married him. I know that. I'm not even looking at the comments. I just know that people are already saying stuff. But she believed him. She had every reason to believe him. She'd never seen him hurt us. She'd never seen him hurt Jacob. She'd never seen him hurt his own kids. He was my dad's best friend. He wasn't just like some random guy. So they got married.
And plus, I mean, your mom's a single mother with a 6-year-old and an infant child, struggling financially, struggling for support. I mean, thankfully, she has her parents there to help her with childcare,
Mhm.
but that it's just, she wants to believe him because
Yeah.
she needs him in a lot of different ways. I mean, when you talk about things as important as health insurance, I
Yeah.
mean, that for your mother coming out of these 2 just tragic things that had just happened to her son, I mean, it's easy to sit back now and judge
Mhm.
unless you've walked a mile in somebody's shoes, and until you've done that, I'd suggest that nobody judge anybody on anything that they do in any given moment because unless you're in that situation, you can't know, you know, and
And
that's
up
that's
to
the
this
way.
point, he hadn't been violent with any,
Right.
like, not in front of people. He was being violent with Jacob, but we didn't really know that at the time. There was nobody
Well,
there
plus
with
they were
him.
they were blaming you. I
Right.
mean, that was his move. I
Yes.
mean, the 2 incidents, the injury to the ear, and the injury to the skull were both blamed on you
Mhm.
as a 6-year-old boy. And like you said, look, man, we had a similar gap with Cameron, our now 17-year-old, and Scarlett. And Cameron was certainly because our older kids were gone, like they weren't
Mhm.
a factor. So it was basically like Cameron, for the most part, was kind of an only child. I mean, Brian and Courtney were still, but they were teens, so
Yeah.
she was showered with all the attention. And when that's pulled from a kid, just basic instinct is going to make that kid feel like, What happened? Like,
Mhm.
where's all the love? Why are you spending all your time and giving all your attention to him? What about me?" Every kid feels that. Like, it does, no matter how much you love having a sibling, especially when they're infants and they require all of the care and all
Yeah.
the attention because they're infants, and that kind of that delineation for a 6-year-old is tough to digest and to understand, and
Yeah.
I'm sure your mother was like, "Eric, I love you. I love you. I have to take care of your brother now. He's got to
Yeah.
eat. I have to feed him. I have to put him to bed. I need to do everything for him. So I can't, I'd love to be spending the time with you too, but and that kind of falls on deaf ears for little kids,
Sure.
So it's just one of those things where it was like with my own kids, it was similar with Cameron and
Right.
Scarlett. She was very, very jealous of Scarlett and everybody fawning all, and it wasn't just mom. It was everybody. Everybody's coming to visit to see the baby, and it's all about the baby. That you know what I mean. So for a little guy or a little girl,
Mhm.
it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to handle. So you were in terms of you were a prime candidate for being the patsy in terms of what this guy was doing because we're gonna get into it because as you all know, I'm a big document guy and Eric had forwarded me the file. So
Mhm.
obviously I dug into it. And what became evident to me is that these injuries were all occurring when the suspect, we'll call him, was in the care of your brother, and
Right.
back when you were living there. So, and it was when no one else was around.
Right.
And
Right.
so, these injuries would occur, and, and it's like, man, is a 6-year-old in that position, and your memories like mine is as to those types of ages, like,
Yeah.
I remember very little from when I was 5 or 6. The things that I remember are all tragic. Like, nothing that I don't have any good memories of being a child, like, that young, because my parents were divorcing, and, we were going through shit, both of us
Yeah.
were, and I think that our minds protect us to a certain extent,
Sure.
and make things tough to remember. Like, everything I remember about my parents being together was them screaming and yelling at each other and me hiding under the bed. That's what I remember about my parents' relationship, and that's it. I don't
Yeah.
remember happy trips and things like that. So in terms of what you can remember on whether or not this guy said something to you,
Yeah.
or whether or not this guy goaded you, like say for instance, he caused the injuries and he says, "Oh, you know what? Like, I know you're feeling angry at your brother. You should give him a little kick." Or whatever,
Mhm.
he could have done to manipulate you as a young
Well,
child. Anything's
actually,
possible.
what happened when the whole blaming was going on, and then I do want to get back to the marriage because there's some important stuff to talk about there.
Yes,
But
definitely.
as we wrap this thought up, um, there was a moment where I was being blamed, and I kept denying it. I kept saying I didn't kick Jacob. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. And my mom even told me about this. This is the only reason why I know this is he grabbed my arm and like in my ear he said, "Don't lie. Don't you dare lie. You know what happens to kids who lie." And then I said, "Okay, I kicked Jacob." Like cuz I was scared. Like he's grabbing my arm and essentially threatening me. My mom remembered that, which is when she sent me away. But they got married and that's when everything changed. This guy was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was exactly the type of person that is described when you're talking about this kind of behavior. He is funny and friendly and happy and everybody loves him and he's friends with everybody and he works in the county so everybody knows him. But behind closed doors, he was an absolute monster. He beat my mom every single day without mercy. He tried to kill her multiple times. He strangled her with a wire hanger. He told her that the only way she was leaving him was in a body bag. He then proceeded to start abusing me, um, emotionally, mentally. He would lock me up in my room for hours and hours at a time. He locked me in the dryer one time. Um, if I needed the restroom and I was in my room, if I had to knock it, to try to get out because there was a lock on the outside, if he didn't feel like I needed to go bad enough, he would just ignore me, and then I would have to figure out what to do. He sexually abused me, and he told me that if I ever said anything, that he would kill me, my mom, and nobody would ever find our bodies.
Man.
So I never said anything, never told anybody because I didn't want to die. And I didn't want my mom to die. We were just trying to survive. He starts grooming my 14-year-old cousin, telling her that he loves her and that he watches her all the time and that he thinks she's so beautiful and he wants to be in a relationship with her, but nobody can know about it. Nobody can know. It's a secret. Um, my cousin didn't know what was going on at our house. She didn't know that my mom was getting beaten every day. She didn't know that I was being abused. And she wasn't afraid of him. She's not afraid of anybody, honestly. She's the wrong person to target when you're trying to do something like this because she had the conversation with him, let him say everything that he wanted to say, and then immediately, as soon as she hung up, told my grandmother and then called my mom and told my mom. So my mom, finding out that he was targeting her niece for sexual abuse, got the strength and wherewithal to get us out of that situation. And my cousin saved our lives. I truly believe it. And in that moment, my mom goes to the police and says, okay, I didn't think that he was capable of what happened to Jacob when Jacob died. But now that I've gone through this, I'm convinced that everything he said to me was a lie and that he actually did purposely kill Jacob. And the DA and the police basically said, well, you changed your story, so you're probably just an angry woman who's trying to get revenge on your poor husband, so we're not going to do anything.
What year is that?
1992. 91, maybe, 92, somewhere around there. I'd given a statement about the sexual abuse I endured because once we were out of there, I told my mom. I disclosed to her after we left because I felt safe enough to do that. And the police asked me a lot of questions about it, a lot of questions about him and his body and his anatomy. My cousin gave a statement on what he was telling her and what he was doing with her, and nothing happened. There's no record of that ever happening. So that kind of leads us to my mom and I really starting to try to, every time there was a new DA, we would go schedule a meeting. Here's the file we have. Can you do anything? They would say no. And then in 2005, she contacted the cold case unit at the state police. And that's when the second investigation was done. We didn't really know about the first investigation until we got the information from the second investigation, if that makes any sense. We had some of the documents, but not all of them.
Right.
But even then, the cold case investigator sent a letter to the current DA at the time in 2005 and said a bunch of things that we can get into in a minute, but basically had asked the DA if there was any way they could bring charges forward on the case. And at the time, the DA said no, due to the age of the case, the lack of evidence, which we'll get into, and the statute of limitations. At the time, there had been a statute of limitations on second degree, I think, manslaughter, which is probably what they would have had to charge him with anyway. So at that time, the statute of limitations had lapsed. There's currently not a statute of limitations, and it has been not just repealed, but is retroactive in the state of New Mexico. So I think that's probably as succinct of a summary as I could get 40 minutes in.
Yeah, no, it was great in terms of kind of breaking down. All right, so I'm going to actually pull up. I'm going to pull up. And Stevie, if there's any way, I don't know, can you make us a little bigger, man? That's not my game. Stevie, if there's some way that you can make us bigger while I have the document up, that would be awesome. So, Eric, when you sent me the file, as you were aptly noting, it was this 2005 investigation where, I mean, they dug into it, you know, and they did a lot of the work in terms of digging into what happened in 92, which were the documents that you were talking about, which were hit or miss for you guys in terms of, you know, trying to get your hands on what happened and who did what and who was interviewed. And, you know, thank you, Stevie. So like what I've kind of gone through, and this is the area that you were talking about. So when the 2005 investigation starts, and I thought that this was very poignant, this particular portion of, and this is right kind of in the first few pages of the document, and the investigator, and who was the investigating officer for this one? Do you remember?
Sergeant Thomas Christian.
Right. And so Christian's drafting this thing up, and he writes this. So after Miss Crawford's breakup with blank, we'll call him Mr. Suspect, approximately 2 years after the incident, she comes to investigator Gordon, now wanting criminal charges filed against Mr. Suspect for beating her son Jacob Landin to death, or Landine to death. The question was, and still is, was the incident a tragic accident, or did suspect beat Jacob Landine to death? I will continue to look into this investigation to see what other material facts existed at the time which support or dispel Miss Crawford's change of heart. Now, Miss Crawford is your mother, just so people don't get confused,
Yeah.
in connection to the death of her son, Jacob. I note and refer, and this is where he was talking about. So right away, and again, cops don't necessarily draft reports simultaneous to the investigation. He may have drafted these months down the road, whatever the case may be. He puts it in the first 4 paragraphs that I note and refer to the New Mexico statutes annotated, that Section A, capital felony within 15 years. He's citing the statute of limitations here within his report. So Section A for a capital felony within 15 years from the time of the crime, was committed, or Section B for a first degree felony within 15 years from the time the crime was committed. Now we're in 2005, right? So at this point, like he's already of the mindset. Now, do you know, and the one thing that I could not dig up, probably because I just couldn't find the statute because it's been altered at this point. They've changed it. But did homicide fall under one of those 2 statutes? Do you know?
For involuntary manslaughter, it did, and I think for second degree negligently caused, I think it did, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong, but that's what I recall.
Okay, yeah, and like, thank God they changed that law. Like in any kind of statute on homicide, because those all fall under homicides. You know, whether it be involuntary manslaughter, second degree, first degree, they're all a homicide, just of varying types. So the first thing that he does is he digs back into the original. He looks at both the original reports and the stuff from 92 and 91, 92. And so originally the offense was listed as an involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah.
And at some point, he notes that a synopsis of DeWalt's, who at the time that this is done is retired. DeWalt's report states the following: the 9-month-old Jacob Landine died from a blow to the head. Okay. And you notice here the autopsy, there was one that was done, scene diagrammed and photographed, no. And the victim diagram photographed, no. Okay. And then the additional witnesses, which is your father, who's deceased at this point. And then you've got Dr. Benny McWilliams. And when we get to what McWilliams says, it's incredibly powerful stuff.
So my dad died in 2021. So I just want to say that my dad didn't die in 2000. Like by 2005, he was still alive. So I don't know why it says deceased father there, but he passed away in 2021.
That's a good fact to know, because I definitely read that and thought that your father had somehow passed away between 92 and 2005. So thank you for clarifying that. All right. So, like I want to kind of get into DeWalt's investigation and because this is like where the mindset has been of law enforcement, like looking at these earlier reports tells you where their head was at. And law enforcement, I don't care how much time has gone on, many times will adopt what their counterparts had done earlier, including their mindset, which is very much what seemed to be the case for the most part with respect to people that were looking at Jacob's matter after the fact. So the interview of your mother stated that she had worked at the Supermart in Socorro, New Mexico, and she usually worked from 3 to 9. However, on the date in question, April 9th of 87, she was scheduled to work 11 to 7:30 p.m. And like you had stated, typically, I mean, your mom's first choice is going to have your mom watch the baby, especially because these injuries were occurring, and your mom's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not comfortable with it. And at this point, we need to just clarify, your mother has shipped you off to your dad in California. So you're not even here.
Correct.
So Eric is not in the picture for this date, the date in question. And she had said that she told her mother, and we're talking about your mom's mom, your grandmother, to take the baby to Mr. Suspect, who was your mom's boyfriend at the time and whom she lived with, if she wanted to go to church, meaning if your grandmother wanted to go to church. And so your mom tells them, so my mom took Jacob to Mr. Suspect's house at around 6 o'clock, and at approximately 7 o'clock, he entered my workplace in hysterics, and he told me that Jacob was in the ambulance and he was not breathing. And according to Miss Landin, Mr. Suspect told her that the baby had fallen off the couch.
Story number
so
one.
That's his original, right? That is his original story. Okay. So Miss Landin told DeWalt that she does not know what happened, and she does not know of anyone who would want to hurt the baby. So Miss Landin, so like, that's it. Like, so your mom at that point in time, her first thing that she's saying is, I don't know anybody that would want to hurt my baby. She's got these, these prior injuries that are kind of rattling around in her head, but in that moment, her head's got to be spinning. And I can't imagine being in work and having Allison or anybody come in and say that, one of my kids is in an ambulance, not breathing, on the way to the hospital. Because I don't know how close in time this questioning happened, but I'm imagining it was pretty close in time.
It's right away.
It's immediately. All right. So she says that Miss Landin told DeWalt that Mr. Suspect seemed to care for Jacob and takes good care of him in her presence, which they always do until the wheels fall off, until they can't help themselves. And remember, like, your love bombing comment was important, because until the predator gets them locked in, the love bombing continues. When the love bombing stops is when they've got them. When they've got their hooks in you, the love bombing disappears, which is exactly what happened here. So she says that he's a good father to his own 2 kids, and he has visitation. So from your mom's perspective, she's like, all right, well, I mean, this guy's got his own 2 kids, and I've never heard about him not being able to have visitation with his kids, which would always be a red flag, in any new relationship. If you get into a relationship with somebody, you're like, yeah, I can't see my kids. You're like, okay, well, you want to tell me why? Because you're concerned. Obviously something has gone on, because it takes great measures for a courts, to sadly sometimes for courts to say, okay, yeah, we're going to cut off visitation or, any kind of parenting time with your kids because you're a threat, So, but back in 87, again, time is relevant here. We are not in 2024. We live in a much different world now. We have much more stringent child abuse laws. We are hyper vigilant with that as a society, as compared to what we were like in the 80s, even into the 90s. It's just, we're living in a different world. And she says, your mother says that Suspect is a good father, and his children have never been unusually injured. The only person who babysits with Jacob is her mother, your grandmother. And she stated that her father is usually present at home, meaning your grandfather, when Jacob is there. However, he spends most of his time outside working on his car. Mrs. Landin, she calls her Mrs. Landing, stated that she was never abused or mistreated as a child, and suspect has never mentioned to her any abuse in his childhood. So they're ruling out your grandparents there. That's what they're doing
Mhm.
there. Now they get into you. This is where you come into the picture. So Mrs. Landin's 6-year-old son, Eric, is extremely jealous of the baby and has been mean to the baby in the past. Now, the thing about this is that at this point in time, this is coming from your mom. And
Yes.
this information that
Right.
she had was coming from Mr. Suspect. Like, so
Right.
we just need the chain of how this information got to your mother. And again, it's easy to sit back and judge and say, oh, well, gee, why would she? It's just until you're in the shoes of that person, you just can't judge anybody in terms of things that they say or do in a given moment. All right. So when Jacob was first brought home from the hospital after he was born, Eric would shake the crib to wake him up. Approximately 5 weeks ago, sometime in early March of 87, Miss Landin noticed that Jacob's ear had been hurt. Miss Landin took Jacob to Dr. Blodgett in Socorro, and Blodgett told her the injury was not serious. Miss Landin stated that Eric finally admitted that Jacob had been crying and that he took Jacob out of the crib. It's just impossible, and dropped Jacob. Eric then put Jacob back in the crib. Suspect was watching Jacob and Eric when this occurred. That's the key part to the entire sentence,
Mhm.
because I'm sorry if we're talking about a standard crib. 6-year-olds, nah. Yeah, like you wouldn't even be able to. How could you get a baby back into a crib unless
Well,
you
and
were?
Jacob was not a little baby. Jacob was 10
No, he looked
pounds when
like he was a load.
he
Yeah,
was 10 pounds when he was born, okay? I was little. I was very small as a child. I mean, by that point, he must have weighed 20 pounds at like 8 months old, almost 9 months. No, he's 9 months old. He must have weighed at least 20 pounds. I mean, probably more than that.
right,
So, just like, physics,
right.
it would not be easy. And I'm
And
noticing
he's
now
moving.
that
You know what I mean?
this was actually blamed on the ear injury, not the head injury. So that takes that
Correct.
whole thing out of there as well.
Right. Exactly. So, and then approximately 2 weeks later, uh, your grandmother noticed a large soft lump on the side of Jacob's head. Miss Miss Landine again took Jacob to see Dr. Blodgett, who treated the injury.
Mhm.
Blodgett or Blodgett, I'm not sure which it is.
I
You
think it's
probably know.
Blodgett.
Uh, Blodgett. It's an unfortunate name. Just is.
Yeah.
Told her the injury was due to a blow to the head. In questioning Eric, Eric admitted to her that he had kicked Jacob on the head. At that time, she telephoned Eric's father, Gene Landine, who lived in Indio, California, and she requested that he take custody of Eric. Miss Landine felt that perhaps Eric was not receiving enough attention, which was causing him to hurt Jacob. By removing Eric from the home, she felt that Jacob would be safe. Unfortunately, that was not true
Mhm.
at all. Um, so this goes into what you were talking about, that Jacob had not been feeling well since the head injury.
Mhm.
Frankly, it sounds a lot like, I mean, would people suffer concussions? Sounds like a lot of the after effects of post-concussion syndrome. Um, but that they were giving him medication. He wasn't reacting well to it. He was breaking out in rashes. Um, and then she ultimately states that at that point, she wasn't aware that he had any broken bones. Now, when we get into this a little deeper, we're going to find out that that wasn't necessarily true internally.
Mhm.
It sounds like he may have had a broken bone, in fact. Okay, so this is where it gets good, okay, or bad, depending on which way we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So this is the first interview with the suspect. Okay, Mr. Suspect had been living with Miss Landine since late December of 1986 or January of 87. Mr. Suspect was employed as a maintenance man for the county of Socorro in Socorro, New Mexico. Suspect told DeWalt that Miss Landin brought Jacob to him at approximately 6 p.m., talking about your grandmother, on Thursday, April 9th of 1987. Mr. Suspect stated that Miss Landin was going to look at a trailer after she got off work, and that the trailer did not have electricity, that they needed to look at it before it got dark. So, and I'm assuming that she's talking about a spot where you guys can move, because at this point you're still living with your grandparents, right?
I think we were living with my grandparents, but we were staying at his place sometimes. So he
Right.
had I think a 3-bedroom, but it just wasn't really big enough for all of us because he had 2 other kids on top of it. So they were looking at a larger place to move to.
Okay. So Miss Landine had reportedly asked her mother to bring Jacob to Mr. Suspect so she would not have to make the trip back uh, to pick Jacob up. Jacob seemed to be feeling all right, and Mr. Suspect put him in his walker and gave him a teething cookie and his bottle. Okay. Mr. Suspect was on the floor dubbing some tape cassettes for his brother. Jacob was playing in the living room in his walker. Now, this, like, you guys keep this in mind. This is the first story Mr. Suspect gives law enforcement. So he claims that one of the wheels on the walker kept getting stuck in the box which contained the tapes. Mr. Suspect stated that he moved Jacob away from the tapes, but Jacob wanted to keep playing with them. Mr. Suspect took Jacob out of the walker and placed Jacob on the floor behind himself. As he was laying on the floor with his head propped up with one of his hands, Mr. Suspect had given Jacob 2 or 3 old tapes to play with, his teething cracker and his bottle. After playing on the floor for a while Jacob became sleepy, Mr. Suspect stated that he picked Jacob up and was carrying him to the bedroom when the tape clicked. Now, I want you to remember that, okay? Because in a different report, he's going to talk about the music level being very, very loud. And if any of you are out there are old enough to remember when we would make mixtapes for girlfriends and boyfriends or anybody that we were interested in, you remember the tape clicking when it hit the end of the side of the tape was not like an overly loud noise. So Mr. Suspect stated that he picked up Jacob and was carrying him to the bedroom when the tape clicked. Mr. Suspect put Jacob on the couch and went to change the tape. Mr. Suspect heard Jacob make a noise. When Mr. Suspect turned around, Jacob was lying on the floor between the couch and the coffee table. Mr. Suspect stated that he picked Jacob up and saw a yellowish fluid coming from his nose and mouth. Mr. Suspect turned Jacob over and patted him on the back in an attempt to clear his mouth. When Mr. Suspect turned Jacob back over, he observed that Jacob's eyes were rolling back in his head. Mr. Suspect then ran to the neighbor's house with Jacob to have them call the rescue unit. Jacob was still throwing up, and Mr. Suspect placed Jacob on the floor and tried to clear his throat, and he gave Jacob mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Mr. Suspect said the neighbor also attempted to revive Jacob. The rescue unit arrived, and Mr. Suspect went to the supermart to tell Miss Landine what had occurred. So no parent or guardian of any kind was in the ambulance with Jacob.
Correct.
Okay. So Mr. Suspect told Agent DeWalt that he did not know if Jacob had struck his head on the coffee table. So Mr. Suspect was aware of 2 previous injuries to Jacob Landine, both of which he believes were inflicted by Jacob's 6-year-old brother, Eric. Mr. Suspect stated that he had been told by Brenda Crawford's sister that he had to watch Eric around Jacob as Eric was mean to Jacob, but Mr. Suspect did not believe them. So
interesting
then,
thing to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. Very interesting, very convenient, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then we get into the injuries again. So we get with the skin deer. And again, they misstate that Mr. Suspect stated that Miss Crawford was finally able to get Eric to admit that he had taken Jacob out of the crib and had dropped him. So then he states the second injury was 2 to 3 weeks later on a Saturday. Jacob was fussy, so Miss Crawford gave Jacob some medication. And when he went back, to sleep the next day on Sunday, your grandmother felt that Jacob had a soft spot and a knot on his head. She immediately took Jacob to the doctor. Your mom did, who treated the injury and reportedly told Miss Crawford that it had come from a blow to the head. So
Yeah.
Jacob was reportedly in the hospital for a couple of days after that. Now, according to Mr. Suspect, when Miss Crawford came home, she asked Eric if he had done something to Jacob, and Eric first stated no. Miss Crawford told him about lying. Eric asked her, what if he was lying? And Miss Crawford told him if he told the truth that he would not be in trouble. Eric then admitted that he kicked Jacob. Eric said that his father told him, when someone hurts you, you hurt them back. Jacob was pulling Eric's hair, so Eric kicked him. Mr. Suspect stated that they took Eric to the hospital, and when they went to pick up Jacob, when Eric came out of the hospital with his head bandage, Eric, according to Mr. Suspect, seemed to be scared. After that, Mrs. Crawford sent Eric to live with his father in California. Suspect stated that he knows of no other injuries or broken bones that Jacob has had. According to Mr. Suspect, Jacob had not been well since the head injury, and he had been fussy, vomiting frequently, and had an ear infection, tonsillitis, and an allergic reaction to the medicine. Mr. Suspect does not know of any injuries that Eric might have had. So Mr. Suspect stated that he does not know how Jacob was injured this time, except that he must have hit his head on the coffee table. Mr. Suspect advised that Miss Crawford is an excellent mother and that her mother, your grandmother, takes good care of the children. And that concludes the interview with Mr. Suspect.
So, Bob, I have to say something. I saw a comment that said that it's BS to think that a woman who was being abused wouldn't think that her baby was being abused. And I just have to say, like, she wasn't being abused before Jacob died.
Right.
Like, she hadn't been, like, he was still love bombing us at that point. So,
Right.
just want to make sure that that's clear for everybody. But carry on.
Yeah, and that might have been somebody who was late into the stream, you know.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point, so they interview your grandmother, and your grandmother, and I wanted to ask you, was she getting the story secondhand as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right, because the ones that are interesting, like not so much about the injuries, but
there were some where she did see me hitting Jacob, where she did mention that she actually did see me being jealous of Jacob. But the main injuries were secondhand.
She wasn't secondhand stuff. Like, so like this is what she had said. Melinda had stated that Eric had been extremely jealous of Jacob ever since Jacob was born. For the first 3 months after Jacob's birth, Brenda, Eric, and Jacob lived with her. Melinda saw that every time when Eric would walk past it, he would hit, this is what you were talking about, would hit Jacob or kick Jacob. There were other events that occurred that showed how jealous Eric was of Jacob. Eric once made a comment that Jacob had a pretty name, which you had already told us, and that he had an ugly name. On one occasion, Eric was eating sunflowers, and Brenda told Eric to be careful so Jacob would not get them because he could choke. Short time later, she found a handful of the seeds in Jacob's walker and another handful in Jacob's crib. And on another occasion, you were playing with toilet paper and cautioned Eric to not let Jacob get any. Later on, they found toilet paper wadded up in Jacob's crib, and Jacob had his mouth full of toilet paper. So she stated that she had not seen any bruises or any indications of abuse on Jacob. And she said that she looks Jacob over very carefully because she has heard a lot of stories about boyfriends abusing children. So your grandma was on it. And like, is your grandmother still with us?
Yeah.
And like, as you guys started advocating for Jacob, you know, did you ever address like these statements that she made about not so much the injury ones, but like considering that you weren't here at the time that the fatal injury occurred, I'm curious as to why she felt compelled to maybe bring up the stuff with the sunflowers and the toilet paper. Did you ever address that with her, or was that something that you were like, I'll just let it go?
Well, it's important to know that this destroyed my family. This was the worst thing that could have ever happened. And my grandmother's way of dealing with it was to ignore it.
Hmm.
And we weren't allowed to say Jacob's name around her.
Wow.
We weren't allowed to talk about it. So my grandmother will not talk to us about what happened to Jacob.
Wow. I mean, does she blame your mother to a certain extent?
Um, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, it's like it's that thing where, women that are stuck in these relationships that are violent and abusive, and when something catastrophic happens, you're blaming the victim, because she didn't get out of it fast enough, or she didn't do and it's just like you just can't do that, because like you have, like, every circumstance is different, every individual is different. How
Yeah.
every individual deals with trauma and abuse is different. There is no pat answer for anything, and
And we didn't
it's
know
like,
what we know now, like we didn't
exactly, like, at
know.
at this point, you don't know any of it. Like, and again, it's like, I had a stepfather, and while he was nowhere near this in terms of abusive, like, if he felt like I was sassing my mom, he'd, like, biff me in the back of the head, like, hard,
Mhm,
and, like, he wasn't extremely fond of me. But when I would tell my mother, and I was much older than you, I was, like, 10. I'm like, "He like, you keep telling me he loves me. I'm trying to tell you he doesn't, because the
mm,
shit that he does to me when you're not looking," and my mom just wasn't hearing it. Like, it was like she thought it was, like, me, because I was very loyal to my dad, and
mhm,
and I realized as I got older, I made it difficult for my stepfather to like me, because I was always pulling the "you're not my dad" shit with him. I mean, granted, he's the adult, but that thing that goes on, because my mom needed a partner in life. I mean,
mhm,
she wanted him to be the guy that she wanted him to be, and, she thought that I might have an ulterior motive, in terms of saying things, and she didn't wanna believe it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And again, it was nothing like any of this that's going on with your brother, but still, it's an example
yeah,
of how this kind of thing can happen in families, especially blended families.
yeah.
Um, all right,
I
I
think
wanna
it's
I wanna
important to
get
talk about the fact that there was an anonymous complaint made to Child Protective Services about Jacob being abused when he was alone with the suspect, which for me is interesting because the neighbor either had to have heard or seen something.
right.
I would think in order to make that kind of a call.
Yeah, exactly, and this is exactly what you're talking about right here. So that's, the call, was received. So Miss Holland, who was a social worker, had received an anonymous complaint from a caller who said that she was a neighbor alleging that the boyfriend was hitting the baby. So I think that's probably the anonymous call
Mhm.
that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, okay, and then, so they continue to interview certain people, and at this point, they interview your father, um,
And me.
you know, and, and you, and we're gonna get to
Mhm.
you. Now your dad, obviously, kind of being like out of the loop a bit, probably, when I'm reading through the report, didn't really have much of substance to say, other than his dealing with you, and him kind of communicating, whatever you may or may not have told him about what was going on
Mhm.
back home, but again, you're like a little kid,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like those situations when, when you have either CAC, like child advocacy centers, where they're doing interviews
Mhm.
of kids, it's always such a tough thing for me to watch, just because, like, these kids being thrust into these situations where they have zero clue, no
Yeah.
idea what is going on, or who these people are that are talking to them, or why they're talking to them. Really, the kids might be old enough to start, like, you're sitting here probably freaking out, like when you're 6 years old, like, "Oh my god, there's police talking to me. Am I in super big trouble? You know, did I
Mhm.
did I make this happen to my brother?" You know, it's like you're blaming yourself and, and then you have no idea. All right, so let's jump to your interview. And again, this was with DeWalt. And again, you're a little guy. You're 6 years
Mm.
old at this point. Okay, so Eric stated that Mr. Suspect never struck him, although he acted like he was going to hit or kick him. So he was
Yeah.
giving you the hand, this guy, you know. Eric also stated the suspect told him that he better be quiet or else. Mr. Suspect would hit Eric with a belt, but Mr. Suspect did not actually threaten him with the belt. Okay, so DeWalt then asked Eric about the incident causing the previous head injury to Jacob. Eric became very agitated and stated that he had not hurt Jacob. This is an important one. This is when you're now. I know this is a very, very like tough ask. Do you remember? Were you alone when she interviewed you, or do you not remember? Was your mom in
My
the room?
my dad was with me. Um,
Okay,
I think my mom and my dad were with me. It's very fuzzy. I remember sitting there, but I know for sure my dad was there.
yeah, okay. Um, Okay, so Eric became very agitated and stated that he had not heard Jacob. DeWalt then asked Eric who had done it. Eric stated he did not know. Eric also told DeWalt that he had not been threatened by anyone to say that he kicked Jacob at the time of the injury. And this concluded. So it was a short interview with you.
Mhm.
Not much probing there.
Right.
Not really trying to get to, and again, from the perspective of law enforcement, you're not the issue because you were in California. Talking about having an alibi.
Yeah.
This girl ever needs an alibi, you had an alibi. You weren't there.
Mhm.
All right, so that concluded the interview with you. So they then talked to pathologists, and it gets interesting here. Um, and the pathologist who had conducted the autopsy, a Dr. Lance, stated that he had found a broken rib, which was an old injury. And in
Mhm.
addition to the older head injury, he found recent trauma to the head. Uh, Lance stated the skull had been fractured along a suture and an open hand probably caused the injury. What a huge finding, when I was reading this, like rereading it because I had read it months ago, but in preparation for today, I was going through it again, and all I could think of was Adam Montgomery. Like this guy who was like punching his kid, his little beautiful Harmony Montgomery in the face repeatedly, and like just this man just like smashing your brother in the head with an open hand, it's like, ugh. Um, so there were no marks on the scalp and very little blood under the skin. Lance felt the onset symptoms would have occurred no more than one half an hour. After the injury, Lance also found slight trauma to the buttocks of Jacob Landin.
And a rib
Lance
fracture.
attempted,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, to the rib fracture. Was he? Do you know? Because I didn't see it in the reports. Was he ever able to date that? Do you know
So
offhand?
we're going to find out that a lot of the documentation related to that is gone, along with a lot of the documentation related to the investigation, and nobody knows where it
Okay.
is.
Okay. All right. So this this interview with Dr. Benny McWilliams is very, very, very interesting. So uh, McWilliams was one of the physicians who treated Jacob when he was brought into the hospital, and the doctor Eric Marchand was the attending neurosurgeon. So McWilliams stated on October 9th, 1987, that he was called at approximately 9:15. Um, and by the pediatric resident, and they were getting an admission. The admission was a head trauma referred from Socorro, initially by Ron Trujillo at Presbyterian Hospital in Albuquerque. At the last minute, it was decided to transfer the child to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, which is what you were talking about. So they airlifted
Yeah,
him out there.
It's the only trauma one center that we have in the state.
Okay. So at this point, they're trying to save his life. Okay. Um, and at that time, Jacob's pupils were equal and reactive. There was a report that when paramedics saw the child, one of his pupils was dilated, which indicates possible brain swelling. One of the treatments is hyperventilating the patient, which they instituted before the child arrived, and the pupil became responsive again. McWilliams said that excuse me, still getting the last parts of that cold off. McWilliams stated that he had told him that the child had increased pressure and was close to hemorrhaging his brain. However, Jacob was already being hyperventilated and there was no evidence of an impending hemorrhage. Jacob was then stabilized in the emergency room and taken directly to have a CT scan. When McWilliams examined Jacob, he did not see any obvious bruises or other trauma. McWilliams could feel the skull fracture, which felt like it was fresh in the posterior position of Jacob's head. There was also a healed scar from previous admission. There was no other obvious trauma. Oh, God damn it. I didn't want to go there yet. Okay. At the time, they were concerned that Jacob had sustained a significant head injury and had bleeding in his cranial vault. Marchand had not yet arrived. Dr. Joe Garcia, the resident in neurosurgery, accompanied the child to the CT scan, at which time they found the skull fracture, which they had seen both by physical exam and a skull x-ray taken in Socorro. Jacob was then taken into the intensive care unit. Marchand arrived and reviewed the case. It was decided to get Jacob into a more stable condition and then take him to the operating room to put a catheter in the area of the hydroencephalitis in order to measure the pressure. McWilliams stated that he still had not spoken to the family at that point. When Jacob needed to go to the operating room, he and Marchand felt it was an emergency operation and they signed the release, which is what you were talking about. Your mom's en route. Like, Jacob beat everybody there because they were in a helicopter. He was airlifted there. So they had to do what they had to do to try to save him. McWilliams then laid down to sleep. At approximately 3:40 to 3:45, the resident called him and informed him that Jacob had expired. Marchand told him that Jacob became unstable and they were unable to bring Jacob back. McWilliams then notified the hospital administrator and Agent DeWalt. Okay, so McWilliams, Marchand, and Dr. Mark Packer, the pediatrician resident on call, they notified you guys, your mother and your grandmother, and the suspect, and another woman. When and this is like, I want to read the report. You talked about this and kind of giving your overview, but I want to get into the language of this. When Dr. Marchand informed them of Jacob's death, Brenda Landine became hysterical. And like, I hate the use of that word as to women. It always reminds me, like, it's like that is such a word that is pinned on women. I mean, I don't even know why it's notable to put in. I mean, what was the expectation? She was just told that her baby had died. It's just like when I'm reading it after the fact, knowing everything that we know now, I'm of course hypercritical, you know, but it's just like, it just shows you a mindset. Like when you read little things and these things that these cops write up, it kind of shows you where they're. So after she calmed down, oh, well, I'm glad your mom was able to calm down, Eric, after she found out your brother had been murdered, and it had passed. She calmed down and came back in. Dr. McWilliams spoke with both Brenda Landine and Mr. Suspect. Dr. McWilliams explained to them that Jacob was extremely sick and near death when he arrived at the hospital, and they were not able to save him. At that time, Brenda Landine again left the room, and Dr. McWilliams spoke to Mr. Suspect. Mr. Suspect seemed nervous. Now, remember, folks, this is the doctor. He's got no horse in the race. He's got no reason to give any other kind of statement other than what he observed with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. So Mr. Suspect seemed nervous and stated this was going to make him look real bad. Yeah, I'd say so. So McWilliams obtained from Mr. Suspect a history of what happened. So this is his. At this point, do you know, is this the first time he tells the story before he tells it to law enforcement?
I
Does
believe so.
McWilliams get the
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this is the first version. This is the first time he utters the story that
Mhm.
he ultimately is going to, in short order, tell the police as well. So Mr. Suspect told him that Jacob had been kicked in. Of course, he starts with you kicking him in the head. It's important. Kicked him in the head by his 6-year-old brother approximately 1 month before the event, and they had drained the hematoma. Following that hospital admission, the family did not feel that Jacob was back to his usual self. He was more irritable. Jacob had several colds and ear infections for which he was receiving medication. McWilliams stated there was no indications of changes in the child's neurological status. If he were slowly developing pressure, there would have been signs. McWilliams stated that Mr. Suspect told him that the mother, Brenda Landine, was going to look at a trailer and left the baby with him. So he skipped a few parts there.
Mhm.
Jacob was with Mr. Suspect for approximately 1 hour. Mr. Suspect stated that Jacob was irritable and that and that is how he typically acts when he's tired and ready to go to bed. Mr. Suspect placed Jacob on a couch, which is 2 to 3.5 feet high, with a coffee table approximately 6 to 8 inches from the couch. At that time, Mr. Suspect had the stereo going very loud. This is where I was talking about where he was talking about because remember, this is the first time he's telling the story. So he's got the stereo cranked because when he tells the cops the story, he heard the tape click off because the side ended. So he's as he's moving, he's changing his story. He's getting this thing out there. He's trying it out. So at that time, Mr. Suspect had the stereo going very loud, and he was doing something like changing tapes. Mr. Suspect told Dr. McWilliams that he heard gasping noises and turned around and saw Jacob on the floor, laying sideways between the couch and on the coffee table. Mr. Suspect then gave Jacob CPR and took him to the neighbor's house to call paramedics. Mr. Suspect did not have a telephone. Mr. Suspect told McWilliams that he never hit the child. Dr. McWilliams told Mr. Suspect that in his opinion, the injuries Jacob sustained could not have been sustained from falling off the couch. After McWilliams told Mr. Suspect that, Mr. Suspect again stated that he never hit the child. I mean, McWilliams knew. McWilliams knew.
Nobody asked him.
It's crazy. He knew. He knew. So McWilliams asked Mr. Suspect if anyone hit Jacob. Mr. Suspect told McWilliams that Jacob had not been hit that day at all. When McWilliams asked him more about that statement, Mr. Suspect stated that he was referring to a month ago when Jacob was kicked in the head, and again stated he never hit Jacob. So Suspect then tells McWilliams that when he picked up Jacob had some yellow frothy material coming out of his mouth. From the description of fluid, McWilliams said that it was most likely that Jacob had thrown up. McWilliams stated that Mr. Suspect felt he was going to be blamed for Jacob's death. McWilliams said he did not have a good feeling about whether Mr. Suspect acted more concerned for himself or for Jacob. Let's read that one again. Dr. McWilliams said he did not have a good feeling about whether Mr. Suspect acted more concerned for himself or for Jacob. McWilliams felt that Mr. Suspect did have more concern about being blamed than the average person he has dealt with. I mean, that's super damning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like this doctor is the first person that this guy talks to. You know, like and the doctor's not a cop.
Mm-mm.
You know what I mean? Like this guy, like I said, he's got no horse in the race, no dog in the hunt. Like he's hearing information and he's giving his honest opinion, which I'm sure was spot on
Yeah.
as to how this guy was acting. Um, so according to McWilliams, Jacob's mother was too upset and could not give a history. So McWilliams stated the primary reason that Jacob died was from a pulmonary edema, which was due to the head injury. McWilliams stated that it is common for the lungs to fill up when you have a severe head injury. McWilliams stated that there would not have been enough force from a fall from a couch to cause this type of head injury. There was evidence on the x-rays of a healing rib fracture. However, on their initial examination, there were no bruises. I
So
mean, he knew.
that does tell you though that rib fracture wasn't from CPR. If it was a healing rib fracture, the CPR that
Right.
was performed that day, it wouldn't be a healing rib fracture, it would have been a fresh rib fracture. So that rib fracture
Exactly.
happened prior to this incident.
For sure. And ribs are tough. Like, I mean, ribs, like, you have a broken arm or broken leg, you're going to see it visually. Obviously, with the ribs, you're not necessarily going to see anything. So, I mean, this could have been an entirely separate incident from either the ear thing or the head injury, the previous head injury, because if they're not taking x-rays of the chest, they're not going to see it. And when he's
Right.
coming in complaining of a head injury, they're not going to take x-rays of the chest. So at this point, we don't know. I mean, it could have been the guy could have been squeezing him
Mm-hmm.
and cracked a rib. I mean, like, could have been many things.
Yeah.
It's all of it sickening.
Mhm.
Okay, so all right, so then do you want to get into the is it
The confession.
Apodaca? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So, just to set the stage. So, we left, we had this reinvestigated. We didn't know any of this stuff until I got these records back from the state. But it turns out that so the suspect had confessed. You can see here it says Detective Apodaca advised Agent DeWalt that a polygraph examination would not be necessary as a confession had been obtained by the suspect. So,
Right.
in my mind, I don't know what this confession says. All right, I just need to say that. But in my mind, if somebody confesses to you that they did something, and this is what you're investigating, that would be to me the opportunity that you would want to take to start proceeding with pressing charges against that person. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a prosecutor, I have an MBA, but logic tells me that that would be the next step.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
am
what
a
happened.
lawyer and I
Yeah, you
agree
are.
completely.
You are.
And I'm a defense attorney
Right.
and I agree. There is no rational explanation as to why this
Right.
case didn't move forward after this. All right.
So I do
Keep
want to say
going.
that the confession, there is currently no recording. There's currently no signed affidavit. There is no notes that indicate what the confession was, under what conditions that confession was given. There's no information, there's no context, there's nothing to point us in any direction. So we have no idea. Now, I will say that I had someone investigate this case partially. I wanted them to fully do it, but they just kind of bailed after having a conversation with Patrick Apodaca, who told her at the time that not only did he record it, but he did get a signed affidavit. But he also said at the end of that conversation that he always knew they were going to cover this up. Now,
Wow.
it, it's important to know that the suspect played basketball a couple times a week with the police. They were all friends. They hung out together. Every time they would get called when my mom was getting beaten, they would show up and they would laugh about how crazy she was and they would leave. So I used to say that I wasn't sure if this case fell apart because of negligence or because of corruption. Now I feel pretty confident to say it was because of corruption.
It's hard to land on anything other than that, right? I mean, like, what other rational explanation is there,
Right.
right? I mean, I can't think of one, and I'm pretty creative. Like, I was coming up with the defenses for years, so I cannot think of a rational explanation other than, and again, like Socorro is a small little town. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like, people have
Yeah.
to understand that, like, small towns are different. They roll different. It's like, it's just one of those things that is true about small towns. All right,
Yeah.
so I want to get into the polygraph thing, how this
Yeah.
thing goes down. So the polygraph examination was scheduled for 1 p.m. And again, Apodaca is the one who said he wanted to give him one, and he
Mhm.
allegedly consented to it. Okay, so this was scheduled on 1 p.m. on April 15th, 1987. So shortly thereafter, 6 days, to be conducted by Sergeant John Cordova of the New Mexico State Police. Did your PI ever talk to Cordova? Do you know?
I don't know. The PI was not really a PI. They were a former police officer for Albuquerque that knew Patrick Apodaca, knew a lot of the players that were involved. And as soon as she found out about this potential cover up, she stopped talking to us.
Okay. Yeah, man. The shit you've gone through, dude. Okay, so and it then talks about on April 14th at approximately 4 p.m. DeWalt was contacted by telephone by Apodaca. Apodaca advised DeWalt that the polygraph examination would not be necessary as a confession had been obtained from Mr. Suspect. Now, so this is written poorly because I'm reading this thing and I just read you all the sentence, the polygraph examination scheduled for 1 p.m. And remember, this is in 2005, right? That they're writing up this report, or 2006. I think they
No,
probably
this was
actually
this was.
drafted it.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Right, because this is them all just going back through the
Mhm.
old file.
That's right.
So at this point, and then it's got this thing where it's talking about what you were just talking about. So the thing's scheduled. They write it as if it was going to happen, and then it doesn't happen,
Mhm.
but then it does happen. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah.
So on April 20th, DeWalt spoke by telephone with Assistant Chief Johnny Trujillo of the
Yep.
City Police Department in Socorro, New Mexico. Trujillo told DeWalt that he had interviewed Mr. Suspect on April 14th, 1987 at approximately 10:30 a.m. During that interview, he obtained a confession from Mr. Suspect. So that's the second one. Is this a second confession?
2 confessions.
So so Apodaca got a confession, and then 6 days later,
Mhm.
we've got Trujillo obtaining a second confession. Have you seen either of those confessions?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. Note, and this is a note by the reporting. This is a note by Christensen. In Agent DeWalt's report, there is no mention as to what exactly Mr. Suspect confessed to and under what circumstances. That, my friend, is shit ass police work and or corruption.
Mhm.
To not be able to find a report of not one, but two confessions of a potential baby murderer is beyond obscene to me. Like, there
So
is no. Go ahead.
no, no, no. I was gonna say this is where my blood starts to boil, and I'm sure that
Yeah.
your blood is boiling right now, and I'm sure that the people watching, their blood is boiling right now. Um, if they would have done their jobs when this was all going down, my mom wouldn't have been beat with an inch of her life every day. I wouldn't have been abused. And who knows how many other people this man has hurt over the last 37 years. Like, I don't understand how these people sleep at night. And so when I say that my mom and I have been gaslit by the authorities for 37 years, this is what I'm talking about. You look at this report and it's clear. It's clear as day to me what happened. And I'm sure that it is for you. Now, the
100%.
problem is that because they didn't do that when they were supposed to, a lot of time passed, and that gave a lot of opportunity for things to happen. This person, the suspect, worked for the county. He was a maintenance worker or a janitor for the county. He had the keys to every county building. So sometime in the 90s, the DA's office burnt down. Now, I'm not saying that he did that. I'm just saying that he had means and opportunity and probably a motive to make that happen. I can't prove that he did that, but it's just things like this that really start to get under my skin, because when we continue to go to DA to DA to DA as they got elected and we continuously told no, we started to feel like, man, are we crazy? Are we making too big of a deal out of this? And then I get this report and I find out he fucking confessed. Are you kidding me?
Man, you must have lost your shit, man.
I'm still losing my
Must have
shit.
lost your shit. Yeah, no shit. I mean, and you had told me about him way back that he had keys. I mean, that's what county maintenance men do. They clean offices. They clean county buildings, which include sheriff and police. You know what I mean? Like, this guy had the ability not only to go, like, we don't even need to go so far as to talk about burning the building down. This guy, after hours, easily could have accessed the reports and disappeared any confessions and or recordings that may have taken place. Because the only thing that I know from this report that was recorded happens to be the polygraph, which we're going to get to, that they actually do conduct. Yeah, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so then we get through okay, let me see. I want to find I was trying not to highlight everything, but I really kind of want to read it all. I'm a reader, dude. Yeah, my people that watch my lives know that I like to read. I mean, what's better than first source material, you know? I mean, this is where we can see how the fucking law enforcement just shit the bed. And you know, and because Christensen, like, the guy dug in, you know what I mean? I mean, the dude really, like, if we would have had him in 87 or even in 92, there's probably a different result, because this guy actually did some work, you know? I mean, this dude was like, this is what you'd expect from somebody who's investigating the suspicious death of a 9-month-old child.
And I do want to remember that when we go into talking about what happened with the attorney general.
All right.
Because I have a lot to say about that. And I don't know if we're gonna have time tonight.
Yeah, we might have to make it a two-parter, brother. I mean, I'm here for it. You know that. Okay, so these are, he was able to dig up, he finally digs up like supplemental reports. And remember, in 87, files don't look like what files look like now. Things were handwritten, things were typewritten on a typewriter. Like maybe some departments were using, like, some of the bigger departments with lots of money were getting like the early stage, you know, personal computers, but like these dudes, or word processors with dot matrix printers that took a half an hour to print, you know. But if I had to hazard to guess, in Socorro, None of that shit was taking place. Like all these things were like handwritten reports or typewritten reports.
Yeah.
And it's everything that you would want to get your hands on now just don't exist, or if they did, have been destroyed either in a fire, which was caused intentionally, or the document itself was destroyed intentionally, not by way of a fire, just by being disappeared.
Mhm.
So like, cause I was going through here and, and I'm like, I'm doing what I always do. I'm trying to start picking apart this dude's inconsistencies, like in things that he says and to different people at different times. So, and this is from Avocado or
Apodaca.
Apodaca's. I always want to call him the avocado. But this is Apodaca's supplemental report, and he had noted at approximately 7 p.m. The suspect showed up at supermarket. Suspect told your mother that Jacob had fallen off the couch and he wasn't breathing, and that Jacob was in an ambulance going to the hospital. She said that she left and went to the hospital with the suspect. On the way to the hospital, suspect told her, "I didn't touch him. I swear." According to Miss Landin, suspect repeated this statement 4 or 5 times. Miss Landin never accused the suspect of anything. He simply just made the statements. Talk about consciousness of guilt. I mean, this dude's freaking out. Like at this point, he's like in the car with your mom. She just
Yeah.
killed your brother.
His game's over.
Like
Everything that he's
his
worked
game,
hard for is over.
right?
Or
So at that point, your mom asks him, "What?" Well, it should have been.
yeah.
What suspect had asked suspect what had happened? Suspect tells her that he put Jacob on the couch, turned around to fix tape on the stereo, and when he turned back, that he saw Jacob lying on the floor, and that
He
he
didn't
saw
hear
stuff coming
anything.
out of. Didn't hear any clicks. The click thing has disappeared. The tape clicking thing has disappeared. Didn't hear the noises that he was making, the gasping for air. That's all. That's not a part of this conversation. And this is actually the first time he tells the story.
Mhm.
So this is before McWilliams. This
Yep.
is with your mom on the way to Albuquerque.
Correct.
Okay, so he says a suspect then ran over to the neighbors to call the ambulance. And, he doesn't talk there. He doesn't talk about any kind of life saving that may have taken place and he didn't mention he tried to perform CPR at the house to your mom either
Right.
initially. Okay, so Brenda then states that Jacob would cry when the suspect made loud noises. Now, this is going back to what you're talking about. Okay, Jacob would clutch her and did not want to be held by the suspect. On the 3 occasions that Jacob was left alone with the suspect, Jacob suffered injuries. See, this is when your mom put it together. Like your mom,
Mhm.
like in 92, had put it together. Like after
Yep.
she'd survived this guy and saw him for what he really was, like at that point, she became driven. She's like, this fucking guy killed my
Yeah.
kid, and I'm not stopping until he goes down for it. So on the 3 occasions that Jacob was left alone with the suspect, Jacob suffered injuries. The injuries were always blamed on Jacob's 6-year-old brother, Eric. Miss Landin then questioned suspect about the previous injuries to Jacob. Suspect denied ever hurting Jacob. Miss Landin did state that she and suspect were getting along fine, but that they occasionally had arguments over buying a trailer. In addition, suspect would, at times, become upset when the baby would cry at night for his bottle. Didn't like when your brother wanted to eat, dude.
Mm-mm.
Didn't appreciate that. Miss Landine stated that on one occasion, suspect was playing the stereo very loud and Jacob was trying to sleep. I mean, that alone to me just shows the complete unawareness and disregard and respect for anybody around you. You're trying to put a baby down and this fucking
Yeah.
guy's jamming come on, man. Just shows you who this dude was. Like little things like that.
Mhm.
She turned on the stereo a little and the suspect became very upset. Suspect told her that the stereo was his private property and she was not to touch it. Miss Landine stated that the suspect was angry and showed a big mood change at that time. Occasionally, suspect would accuse her of acting like his ex-wife. According to Miss Landin, Steve's children were never hit by him. And that's according to, oh, we didn't mean to get that one out there. So to suspect's children never, here, I'll whip by that real quick. But again, whatever your mom's hearing is coming from him.
Yeah.
There's nothing coming from his ex-wife or from anybody else. It's all coming directly from him. So can you trust it? Of course not. You can't trust it. All right. So let's get into I think that was the only night, and I meant to actually black that out. I remember that was the only time in the early reports that they mentioned a name, but fortunately not a last name. Okay. I want to get to this is the polygraph. Okay. So remember, this thing was originally scheduled for April 15th. He confesses on the 14th to Apodaca, and then to Trujillo, like shortly thereafter on the 20th. So they're liking the guy. Like, I mean, like, why this guy's not under arrest at this point is beyond me. Again, it's that thing where you have to be like, what?
Yep. Why?
So, but they saw fit that on a correspondence was addressed to Mr. Bruce Burwell,
That was the
the
DA at the
assistant
time.
district attorney. Yep.
88,
In Socorro. Yep. The letter was signed by Sergeant Willie Garcia, the polygraph examiner. This is a synopsis of what the letter of correspondence said. Dear Mr. Burwell, on July 9th, 1987, Mr. Suspect made himself available for a control question polygraph examination conducted at the New Mexico State Police facilities in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The purpose of the examination was to determine whether or not Mr. Suspect intentionally struck 9-month-old Jacob Landing. They keep calling him Land. Your people, the Landings, struck 9-month-old Jacob Landin in the head area on April 9th, 1987. Investigative information provided to me by the Socorro County Sheriff's Office indicated that the Landin child had expired as a result of a blow received to the head area. Prior to Mr. Suspect's pretest, he was made aware of his constitutional rights under the Miranda, and he signed the appropriate form. So these are the following relevant questions that were posed to Mr. Suspect. Question 33, did you intentionally strike Jacob in the head area on April 9th, 1987? Answer, no. Question 35, did you intentionally strike the baby in the head area before he went limp? Answer, no. Based on the numerical evaluation of Mr. Suspect's graph recordings, I, Sergeant Garcia, concluded that he, Mr. Suspect, was not being truthful when he answered no to the relevant questions. So Garcia continues to write, during the post-test interrogation, I pointed out his physiological reactivity to the relevant questions, which reflected his untruthfulness. He continued to deny any action on his part, which contributed to the child's death. Following an extensive discussion, Mr. Suspect subsequently admitted to being untruthful to investigators when they initially questioned him regarding the circumstances surrounding the child's death. Now, this is the polygraph that you were talking about, where you and your mom went down there with them to Santa Fe. And when he came out, he appeared to be happy and smiling.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. And you guys were like, wow, I guess Jacob really did just bump his head really hard. That fractured his skull. I mean, what are you supposed to, like, the guy's walking out, not under arrest.
Right.
And you don't know that this guy's given 2 confessions and has now failed a polygraph as to
have no idea. Yeah.
Key questions. And if law enforcement's not telling you anything,
Nope.
You didn't hear any of this from law enforcement, huh? They didn't take your mom and say, hey, look, this is where we're at with this guy. Nothing. 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 So, uh, this is his changed story. So this is what he pivots to in July. So allegedly at the time that he had been questioned, he was sedated, Eric. So just so you know, when he originally told those stories, he was sedated to the extent that his mental faculties were impaired.
Interesting that that wasn't notated by the original investigators.
It's pretty convenient. Mr. Suspect attributed his untruthfulness to his fear of rejection by your mother, Brenda Landine. He expressed regret that the mother would now learn the truthful facts, inasmuch he felt the death was accidental. How does he figure that she's going to learn the truthful facts?
And
Is
if it was
he
accidental, why was he worried about it?
right? And but like, where is he getting the idea that they're telling you guys jack shit?
Right.
You know, because they weren't. Mr. Suspect explained that on April 9th, 1987, he was caring for the child, Jacob, awaiting the arrival of Brenda Landine. The child was in a standing position, holding himself onto the wooden armrest of a chair. So it's already changed significantly,
Dramatically.
In the living room, Mr. Suspect allegedly knelt beside him and angled his chin in a position to playfully rub his growth of his beard between the child's legs. So, like, I was trying to envision this. So he's saying your little brother, little 9-month-old brother, still trying to find his footing in this world, holding onto a chair. Okay, the arm of a chair. Assumedly, his legs are spread. And it sounds like he's saying that he slid his legs in between your brother's spread legs while he's standing to tickle his little legs with his beard hair. Am I reading that right? Is that what is?
I don't know. This one I have a hard time with. Well, first of all, what the fuck are you doing with your beard
It's
between
weird.
the kid's legs?
It's weird.
Like, what?
Right. It's
This
it's
doesn't
weird.
this one doesn't make any sense to me at all.
And this is one that this guy has had months to cook up.
Mhm.
Like this is a guy who smacked the shit out of your brother's head to the extent where he kills him, and his seemingly escaped prosecution thus far.
Yeah.
He gets a call in July that they want to talk to him again. Moreover, they actually want to do the polygraph that was previously scheduled. He agrees to do it. This dude's mind is racing for however much notice he had when maybe he thought it was over to now. He's back on the clock. He's
Yeah.
back in the scope of law enforcement, and he's trying to come up with some kind of shit that maybe explains this away. All in the meantime, knowing that this doctor that was looking and examining and performing surgery on your brother said, "Hey,
Mhm.
that bullshit you told me about him falling off a couch and either hitting the floor or hitting a coffee table is not the kind of impact that's going to cause that injury, dude." So he's got that in his head. All right. So
Mhm.
this is him trying to cook up what happened. All right. So he's got his head between Jacob's legs, weirdly rubbing his beard hair on his legs. While doing so, he sensed the child was about to lose his balance, and he abruptly raised his head. So that means his face is going into Jacob's crotch, right? To prevent
Mhm.
him from falling. I'm not sure how that works as opposed to just sliding out and grabbing him. I don't know.
Right.
Um, to prevent him from falling. Instead, the child had leaned his body over Mr. Suspect's head. As he raised his head, he forcibly raised the child off of his feet, causing him to impact heavily on the floor. Mr. Suspect further explained he was certain the child's head struck the wooden armrest before he fell to the floor. Dude, it's the same fucking thing that you made up with the couch.
Mhm.
It's the
It's
same.
still
Like
not the same. It's still not gonna work.
it's not going to work. It doesn't work. It's still him hitting his head on a piece of wood that's not going to cause a fracture of his skull. Like
And
it's
probably
just,
not the size of the open palm of an adult male either.
oh man, with just a violent smack, open-handed. Immediately after the baby fell, Mr. Suspect picked him up and held him in his arms for what he approximated to have been 10 minutes. During this time, the child did not exhibit any visible indications of being injured. Like, this is hugely significant. Like, this
Mhm.
part of the story that he decides to like, if we're sitting here trying to get in this guy's brain, like, why do you add that I held the baby for 10 minutes before I did anything? And, he sticks in there that the baby didn't seem to be showing any kind of distress.
So no
Like,
vomiting,
like
no
nothing,
gurgling.
nothing. It's like, but
Interesting.
where is he coming at? What world does he think that this is the move? Like, this is
Mhm.
like, so yeah, I held the baby for 10 minutes. During this time, the child did not exhibit any visible indications of being injured. However, he did appear to be drowsy. Oh yeah, no shit. Mr. Suspect at this point decided to put the child to bed and began walking to the bedroom. So he's doubling down with the couch thing, man. This is where he's going to double down with the couch thing. So it now becomes, well, let me read it. Mr. Suspect has been duplicating cassette recordings, and before he reached the bedroom door, he heard the recorder reverse automatically to a pre-recorded side. So I guess the music wasn't playing loud anymore in this version. We
Right.
don't have loud music playing anymore. Mr. Suspect placed the child on the sofa while he attended to the recording device. And while doing so, the unattended child fell to the floor a second time. According to Mr. Suspect, he quickly picked up the child, who at this point went into convulsions and was regurgitating from both the mouth and the nostrils. Mr. Suspect leaned the child over his left forearm, patting him on the back, attempting to clear the air passage to no avail. Mr. Suspect then held the child from both feet and continued patting Jacob's back. So he's got your brother up like this, or with one hand because he's patting him. Can't be holding him
Mhm.
with both hands because he's patting him, right? He's holding him by both feet with one hand and patting him. That's what he's doing. Okay.
According to
Um,
him.
According to him, when the child lost consciousness, Mr. Suspect panicked and ran with the child to seek assistance so he wasn't panicked at that point with the shit coming out of his nose and his mouth. He's not panicked at that point. Your brother's fallen twice in his world and smashed his head. He's not concerned until your brother finally loses consciousness. So he runs over. They call medical assistance summoned. They get there. So suspect's polygraph examination was sound recorded in its entirety and is available for transcription if necessary. So how was that, Eric? How when you listen to that, what did you feel like?
I don't have it.
Oh, oh, okay, yeah. Oh,
Interesting.
where is that? Does anybody
Who
know?
knows?
Anybody know where that
Who
is?
knows? Who knows?
So the polygraph has vanished off the face of the earth as well, huh? Did that go in the fire, dude? Maybe that went in the fire, right?
Could have.
Even though this was at the New Mexico
State
State
police.
Police in Santa
Yeah.
Fe.
Yeah.
Did that building burn down too? That
Not
we're
that I
aware
know of.
of?
Not that I know
Okay.
of. Yeah.
All right. So uh so this is another supplemental report that I thought was interesting. Detective Joe Haley filed this supplemental report on January 9th of 1991.
This is
Okay,
after
and
my mom had been being beat every day. FYI.
Correct. So this is when your mom has come to the conclusion that this guy is a giant abusive piece of shit.
Mhm.
Okay, so Haley interviewed Brenda uh, and the suspect. I guess is that like they just don't put commas in here. Your mom certainly was not a suspect. She was working. So Detective Haley interviewed Brenda, suspect at the police department in Socorro, New Mexico, in connection with the investigation. Brenda told Haley that she never really trusted suspect with Jacob, as she thought that Mr. Suspect was a little jealous of Jacob. Brenda stated that she thought that Jacob's death was an accident, that she first thought that Jacob's death was an accident, but she now does not think the truth came out. Brenda stated that she stayed close to Mr. Suspect, that she might find out what really had happened. And she eventually married Mr. Suspect. So when Christensen sees this thing, what do you think is going like? So when you gave your synopsis at the beginning,
Mhm.
you felt the need to kind of give like a little bit of I don't know what I call it, but like explaining why your mom stayed in this relationship, because that most people are like, well, how could she stay in that relationship?
Mhm.
So like where do we think when Christensen runs into this report from Haley, where do you think his head goes? You know what I mean? He's like,
Yeah.
he doesn't have you explaining what the reality of your life was
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah.
He has no idea what was going on in your world with your mother in her life. He's just reading shit on paper,
Mhm.
you know? So, um, she said that, this is where she starts spilling some tea like this. So this is after the abuse starts occurring with her, with you, and she's done with this dude. And she is possessed to get justice for your brother.
Yeah.
So she states that sometime in November of 90 that she met Mr. Suspect at the city police department in Socorro, New Mexico, and he made the following statement. Mr. Suspect reportedly told Brenda that he was playing with Jacob, throwing Jacob in the air, and that he missed Jacob, and Jacob hit the chair pretty hard. So we've got now our third version of the
I
story.
think it might be a fourth,
Is
because the
it
first one was my
is it the
mom's, then the
Oh, that's right.
doctor, then the lie
The doc.
detector, and now
Yes.
here.
Now we've got the fourth version.
Yeah.
So Mr. Suspect reportedly told Brenda that he was playing with Jacob, throwing Jacob in the air, and then he missed Jacob. Wow. I never miss my kids when I threw them in the air. Like, and you're tossing them like a couple inches, like, woo,
Yeah.
hee, because you want to hear him giggle. All right. And that Jacob hit the chair pretty hard. Brenda stated that this was all Mr. Suspect said about Jacob's death, and that the rest of the conversation was about them getting back together. Haley then asked Brenda about the first injury to Jacob. Brenda stated that the only ones at home at the time were Mr. Suspect and her son Eric, and of course Jacob. Brenda advised that she was told by Mr. Suspect that Eric had kicked Jacob, and that was what caused the first injury. Brenda stated that everybody blamed Eric, and Eric said that he had kicked Jacob. Brenda told Officer Haley that she does not feel that Eric kicked Jacob hard enough to cause that type of injury. Detective Haley asked Brenda if she had talked to Eric about this. Brenda stated yes, and that Eric had advised her that he did kick Jacob, but that he was playing around and did not kick Jacob that hard. So there you go, man. With that, well, so we're at the 2 hour mark.
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave it up to you because I could go 10 hours, but I'm not trying to torture you.
Yeah.
But I like there's more to be told. Um, and
Yeah.
I'd like to get through it. Uh, so what do you want to do? Do you want to call it for tonight and then
I I would like
uh ma-
to I would like to wrap up with just a little bit of a synopsis of where we
yeah,
are
let's do that. Let's do
with the
that.
case and where and how we got here. and then
Okay.
I think we can probably come back and finish out the rest of this part of it.
Okay.
Um, so I started my podcast, True Consequences, in 2019 in the fall. Initially, I had done it because I wanted to start speaking out about some of these issues that are happening in New Mexico. Jacob's case is not unique, unfortunately, in this state. We have some of the worst child maltreatment and child health and safety issues in the country. Um, our state is very poor in terms of the population. The government itself has lots of money, but the population is very poor. And there's a lot of adverse childhood experiences that happen here as a result because people turn to drug addiction and other things to deal with their own trauma and their own issues. So, we have a tremendous amount of crime. We have a tremendous amount of childhood trauma that occurs here. And I just felt like it was important for somebody to talk about these. Our government is refusing to do anything about it. They're not making the changes that are necessary for protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. And so I created the show to create this platform and be able to help other people in my situation, my mom's situation, people who are not getting the attention that they deserve for their cases. And initially, I wasn't going to tell Jacob's story because at that point, we thought that it was over. We thought that it was done. We didn't think that there was a possibility because of the statute of limitations that had happened or that had been in place at the time. But then I found out through another case I was working that had been repealed. And I also started to feel a little bit guilty about asking people to come on my show and tell their most horrible, tragic thing that ever happened to them. And I wasn't willing to do it myself. So I asked my mom if she wanted to come on the show. And we recorded an episode. That was the first time we'd ever talked about this together. And then we both decided that we were going to start going out and trying to get more attention on the case because when Jacob was killed, he didn't make the news. He didn't make the local paper. Nobody knew that this happened. It was completely just a non-event, according to the media. So we started going and reaching out, and I went on, Kindle Ray, and I went on a bunch of other shows talking about Jacob's case. And then I decided a few years ago to do a calling campaign, and I had a petition created for the Attorney General, or the District Attorney, sorry. And we did 10 days of Jacob, where I asked people to call, email, write the District Attorney in Socorro and ask him to reopen the case. And it was during COVID when all of this was going on, and he sent an email to me and the Attorney General at the time, Hector Valderas, and said, "Hey, I can't deal with this. My office is down to a skeleton crew because of COVID. I'm going to turn the case over to the Attorney General so they can investigate it." And the Attorney General picked up the case and said they were going to investigate it. About a year into that, there was an election, and Raul Torres was elected Attorney General. So I decided that I would make an effort to interview the candidates for AG on my show, to educate my listeners, but also to start building that relationship with them. And I was faced with two very different personalities. One of the Attorney General candidates was like, "I've heard about your story. I listened to your podcast. I'm so sorry about what happened. I can't promise you that I'll do anything, but I do want you to know if I get elected, like I will do everything I can to have this investigated properly." When Raul showed up, I spent that first few minutes trying to build a rapport saying, "Hey, I don't know if you've heard of me or if you've heard my story." And he was like, "No." I said, "Okay, well, let me just tell you a little bit about me and who I am and where I'm coming from and why I'm doing this." He did not seem very interested, but I just was like, okay, maybe it was just the moment. Maybe I caught him at a bad time, whatever. But I knew that he cared about being elected. So I was like, I can work with that. This whole time that they have this case, I'm staying quiet. I'm trying to keep things on, an even playing field for them so that they don't have their work cut out for them, so that they don't feel like I'm doing things that could jeopardize their investigation, because I really believed that they were doing a fucking investigation. In January of this year, my mom and I were asked to come down to their office in Albuquerque. The suspect is not an officer, and I don't believe he ever was, but he did work for the county and did have the keys to every county building. But anyway, back to where I was. So January we're pulled in, and it wasn't easy. My mom lives in Socorro still, 75 miles away from here. So I had to drive to Socorro to pick her up, drive back to Albuquerque to take her to that meeting, and then drive her back home and then come back home myself. So, 250 miles round trip in one day. So we got our hopes up because we were like, surely they knew this was happening. Surely they wouldn't drag us in here, make me go through all of this to give us bad news. We were mistaken. And I know I'm like giving away the ending, but I think like it is important that we talk about this because
No, we
I'm so
have
mad
to.
about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
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 No question.
So not only did they say they weren't going to prosecute, but they said they weren't going to prosecute due to insufficient evidence. And I said, okay, well, I understand that the confession is gone and I understand this and that happened. And they're like, well, the DA's office burnt down, right? And I said, yeah, I do know that. And I said, and that he was a maintenance man for the county and had the keys to every building, right? And they were shocked. Like this was the first time that they had ever heard this. And let me just tell you that I included his pay stubs in with the file that I gave them. They had those. They just had to look at them.
Right.
So that was my first indication that things weren't on the up and up. So I did a request for records. I asked for all reports, supplements, interview transcripts, interview recordings related to the reinvestigation of Jacob's case that started 3 years prior. And they sent me back my original file in 3 pages from the University of New Mexico Hospital that didn't tell me anything I didn't know. And they said, okay, well, we're going to consider this matter resolved. And I said, the fuck you are. This is not what I asked for. I want to know who you talked to, when you talked to them, what they said. Like, I want to know all of that. I want to see everything. So a couple weeks go by. Yeah. A couple weeks go by. They send me 2 more pages. So we're up to 5 pages now. And according to that document, it looks like they only talked to one person, to one doctor in 3 years. And so I got really angry about that. And I wrote them back and I said, what the hell? Like, you're calling this an investigation, a thorough investigation? You think that this is okay when you've had this for 3 years and all you've talked to is one person? Why did you not try to talk to the suspect? Why did you not try to put a tiny bit of pressure on him to see if he'd confess again, knowing that he already did twice? Why would you not even try? Why would you not talk to my mom? Why would you not talk to me? Why would you not want to get more information? And what they wrote back to me pissed me the fuck off. Essentially, they said that my mom gave the suspect an alibi, which she did not. She could not because she was not with him. He was alone with Jacob. I think what they're referring to is when my mom was asked if she thought that if she thought her boyfriend could intentionally hurt Jacob, she said, I don't think so. And she didn't back then.
And that's not a fucking alibi.
That's not an alibi. And that shouldn't prevent you from digging deeper. Like it shouldn't.
That's for sure.
I'm sorry. So essentially, the Cliff's notes of what they said to me was, we didn't find additional evidence. No. A, the evidence is missing. B, we didn't find any. C, we're not going to. And D, it's because your mom gave an alibi. It's her fault that we can't do this. That pissed me off. And this is where I am right now. I am so disgusted by the fact that this man was allowed to not only kill my brother, but molest me and abuse my mom and who knows how many countless other people. In the state of New Mexico, Raul Torres' office and anybody else who allowed this asshole to get away for 37 years is responsible for every single person he has hurt since. And I'm going to leave it there for now.
All right. So what can people do?
Share Jacob's story. It seems like a small thing. I am going to start putting pressure on. I am going to go national. I am going to start putting more pressure on these assholes. But for now, awareness is going to go a long way. The more people know about Jacob's case, when we get ready to start calling and emailing the Attorney General, when we get ready to start going on national television, that's what it's going to take to get this person to pay attention. Because right now, it's politically not unpopular for him to ignore us. Let's
Right.
fucking make it politically unpopular for him to ignore
That's
us.
it. Pressure. Got to apply pressure. I think I Googled it. I think that your petition is still active. Am I
I'm
correct?
probably going to do a new one. So feel free to sign that one. Absolutely. But I'm
Is-
probably going to do a new
That was
one.
at 96,000 signatures. So
Yeah.
I mean it had some teeth. And y'all, you have to, if you consider yourself an advocate out there in the world, and exactly what Eric was saying, little things just like hitting that share button to get the story out. Listen to True Consequences, listen to his episodes. And there's many other pods have done what we're doing here tonight, probably not going through as many of the reports, but that have told the story. Spread the word. Do the work. You can do this. You can help us. Help Eric, because we want justice for Jacob. 37 years is too goddamn long. It's obscene. You've heard it, you've seen it in black and white tonight. What they had, how this man wasn't placed under arrest is beyond me. And enough is enough. And at this point, Eric's in a position where we have to help him apply pressure in this situation. And, and we can do it. We can make this happen. We can make this thing happen. And, I love you, brother. Anything that you need from me, I'm there. So y'all make sure you're sharing this episode out. Get the word out. We had a nice audience tonight, but it needs more. We need more eyes and more ears need to be on it. We need this thing spreading out there so that people are talking about it and it becomes a thing that Torres cannot ignore. That's what we need to happen. We need that pressure to be applied, and we could do it. I mean, we're in a community with a ton of advocates out here, and everybody that puts the time and the effort and the blood and the sweat into advocating for their loved ones, like Eric. They see results, but they fight this fight. All of them do, because it's just not easy to do. Trying to get people to dust off what they consider to be old and cold cases and that they consider to be closed. It's like it's like a Herculean task.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you guys out there, my subs and the people that listen to the pod, because we're turning this into a pod episode. Help us help Eric. Just do the minimal, and if you want, do more. Write letters. Letters are effective.
Hey, reach out to Dateline, reach out to 48 Hours, tell them to cover Jacob's story. I'm asking them now. The more people flood them with that request, I'm sure they'll reply. Reach out to your favorite podcasters. Like, I will go on whatever show it takes to get justice for Jacob. I'm not giving up. My mom and I are not giving up. We don't give a fuck what Raul Torres says. I don't give a fuck what he says. This isn't his fight.
Good man. That's right. It should be.
I love you.
But it's
I love
not.
you. Thank you.
I love you too. Of course. All right, brother. It's been gut-wrenching, of course, but it's a extremely important story that we have to keep telling over and over and over. And you and I will figure out when we'll get into the rest of these reports, because it's if you were sitting here watching tonight and you were shocked, you should be, because it's shocking.
Mhm.
So, all right. I'll let you run. I'm going to say thank you to the folks that gave some donations. I love you, man. And I'll see you soon.
All right, y'all.
Back at
Thank
you.
you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right. So Eric's an amazing guy. And he's been fighting this fight for so long, y'all. So I hope that you were feeling what I was feeling, and what I've been feeling for years since I met him and he told me the story. It's just one of those stories that really sticks with you. And I appreciate all of you hanging in there for a couple hours. I don't think Eric thought I was going to go that long. So I appreciate him hanging with me for as long as he did. And thank you, Meg P, for becoming a new member. I thought you were already a member. Maybe I'm crazy. And thank you David James for the $10 hollow, and then following it up with the $5 hollow. And then Jen, thank you for being a member for 2 months. And Jen with another $20 super sticker, the $20 hollow. Appreciate you. Aw, family hug. I love all you guys. Thank you so much for joining. This week, I want to let you all know, Thursday, I'm jumping on with the boys at Publicly Buzzed. They're covering the trial with the Rust case. The armorer's going up, and her trial, I believe they're picking a jury Wednesday. Jay's going to be streaming that one. I imagine I'll probably jump on with him on and off to discuss it. But Thursday night, I'll be jumping on with the boys and our homie Adam Malone, who's a brilliant cat. You haven't heard or checked him out, you're gonna love him. Super smart guy, very inquisitive, and he's very much into the true crime community, and he's got thoughts. So I'm really excited about that. It's the first time I get to hang with him, so I really appreciate doing that. And then Friday, I am going to have a live with Julie Murray, who has one of the top podcasts in the country right now, all about her sister, Maura Murray, which is just one of those cases, true crime cases, that is unbelievable. And Julie is doing it where she's finally telling Maura's story as only a family member could know. And if you haven't been listening to her pod, which is called Media Pressure, it's unbelievable. Check that out. You should listen to all the episodes before we get to Friday's live with Julie, because she's unbelievable. If you guys are saw her on J-Bo's, he had a live with her. I don't know if it was a month or two ago. It was great. She is just the fiercest advocate. Like, if I ever need somebody to advocate for me, like, I'm going to her, because she's all that and more. So that's going to be one you don't want to miss. And I'm really looking forward to that one. So that's kind of the schedule for this week. Like I said, I'll probably hop on with Jay if he'll have me when that trial starts, because it's interesting. And the Rust case is with Alec Baldwin, the one where somebody on the set ended up getting shot and killed, and it was it was supposed to be a prop gun that was loaded with dummy rounds, and one of them wasn't, and and Baldwin pulled the trigger and or cocked the hammer back and killed her. So it's a tragic story. So yeah, look for me this week. I'll be around, and of course, if anything pops up Delphi, you guys know I'll be there. Mag, $10 holla. Appreciate you, girl. You're the best. You're an always giver. You know that. All right, you guys. Thanks for hanging, because as you know, without y'all, I'd just be an old man talking about old and new cases. Talk to you next time.